Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today is May 9th. We are 10 days away from the results of the by-election that was held 2 Sundays ago. And it is such of importance to discuss what happened and what are the repercussions there that Dan Harada and I decided to give you an update and a briefing on what's going on in Japanese politics now. My name is Timothy Langley. Thank you very much for joining us. Dan Harada, thank you for joining us today. Is Dan there? There you go.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So, Dan, there was a by-election that was created because 3 seats became vacant, 2 of them because of political machinations with political funds and bribery, and 1 because of the death of the seated member of the lower house in Shimane. These 3 Diet seats were held by members of the LDP. And the election results, the LDP did not feel confident enough to even run a candidate in 2 of those elections, but in 1 of them, in Shimane, the second lowest populated prefecture in Japan, had an election for a seat that had been dominated by the LDP for 15, 20 years. And it pitted the LDP against the main opposition party, the Constitutional Democratic Party, and the result was that the LDP resoundingly lost. This has implications. We waited, in fact, Dan, to have this briefing to see what the fallout was going to be. We wanted to have the Prime Minister come back from his 3-country trip. He was in Paris, Brazil, and Paraguay, and we wanted a couple of days for this situation to gel. It didn't take any time whatsoever, did it?
No, the Prime Minister got off the plane, and within 2 hours, at the time it takes from the airport to Tokyo, central Tokyo, he called a meeting of the party. That was on a Monday afternoon, a holiday, a meeting, and to review the situation, analyze what has been going wrong and what may happen in the future.
So one of the reasons why this briefing is so important, I think, to our audience is because that election happened on Sunday, the beginning of Golden Week. The entire country has been on a break since yesterday. Yesterday, we come back to work, and now things are beginning to bubble up. But let's get into how important and how crucial the Shimane defeat was for the LDP.
Well, there are several ways to look at it, but if you add the 3 elections together, it is 3 losses against 3 gains. That means that the balance of power within the House has changed. For instance, the Ethics Committee, before which Kishida-san appeared to testify about the bribery scandal, the balance has changed. And the opposition now has sufficient numbers. They went from 8 to 9, and with 9 members, gives them the right to demand that somebody, whoever that may be, does appear before the committee to testify. So that is the most unlooked at and most important thing that happened out of these realities. 6 have changed.
That's right. And in fact, it really didn't hit our radar until just this last week. So I guess it was a good idea for us to wait and see. But all of the newspapers now, the Japanese newspapers, are reporting about this shift in the balance of power. And with the Ethics Committee consists of 27 members. And since the LDP, in coalition with the Komeito party, holds the majority, that means in every committee, the LDP and Komeito hold a majority position. But the opposition parties also have some power. But within the Ethics Committee, the reason why this is so critically important is because in the opposition, if you have less than 1/3, you really don't have any power. It's kind of like shareholdings. If you have less than 33%, your power is completely diminished. But if you have 1 vote more than 33%, then it gives you at least some rights. And within the Ethics Committee, the Constitutional Democratic Party had 8 seats, which does not give them 1/3. So they can't insist on anything. They just have to sit there and watch proceedings. Now, with the change in the numbers that was dictated by the by-election results, now they have 9 members, and 9 members is 1/3 of that committee. So that allows them to insist to the ruling party in this committee, we want to have people show up for testimony. They can't demand it, but they can insist upon it. and it's up to the chairman of the committee to either say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. We're not going to do what you have suggested, but thank you very much for your input, right?
Yes, that's correct. But beyond the numbers, Jiminto is going to be in a very tight position to refuse the request of the opposition, because you will definitely have the media hounding them. And for public relation purposes, it is better for Jiminto to agree to the request of the opposition. Anyway, everybody knows at the end of the day, particularly after the production of Kishidas in that same committee 2 months ago, that it really doesn't mean very much. But at least for public relation purposes, it's a good move for the opposition.
Oh, I can see that they're circling the carcass. I think that's probably not an apt description, but they are lining up. The fact that the prime minister showed up for the ethics committee and testified, even without them insisting that he showed up on his own volition. He testified, and then he went for his state visit to the United States, thinking this is all finished now. I've punished the people who I thought should be punished. We'll put this together. I'm going to the United States. I'm going to have a great 5-day trip to the United States, and I'm going to come back somewhat victorious. We had a discussion about this maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, Dan, and we thought that maybe this would provide the gust of wind that the prime minister needed to close down the House. How different today looks for the prime minister than it did back then.
Because of a result of the 3 by-elections, because of a 6-seat change in the composition of the House. That's all it took.
So the opposition party is going to propose what, Dan? They're going to say, by the way, we're not finished the ethics investigation. We would like to have some testimony from these other people who you kind of brushed aside on the kickback scandal. Is it something like that?
Yeah, it is something like that, but it's even more specific than that. They want 44 members of Jiminto and members of Jiminto to come and testify. And there is some room for negotiations. As I hinted at a few seconds ago, the Jiminto is going to be, Tanaka Kazunori, who is the chairman, will find it very, very difficult to flatly refuse their request. So the one area of negotiations will be, well, not all 45, but 22 or 16 or whatever.
It's kind of a no way out. If there is testimony, the LDP is just going to look worse. The press will play it up. The questions will be piercing. Mr. Izumi, who is the leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party, is now feeling very emboldened. He's looking very presidential, isn't he? He's going to be on fire at this testimonial stage.
To use your word, on fire, it's not only Izumi-san who's burning on fire, it's the whole Jiminto. I mean, the situation is very serious, and the situation, to some extent, looks like the situation we had in 2009 in the Aso administration, just before Jiminto lost power. It's very similar.
So here's a graph, Dan, that shows there a bright line that's very short. The top one is green and the bottom one is blue. And this is the graph of the current situation. And it's superimposed upon, at the same time, the previous months before the government changed over and the LDP lost power. This is still during the time when Aso was prime minister. And then there was the change in government, as you can see the graph where the red was below and now it's above. And that indicates that there was a change in the government. It's not completely representative of what was happening in the earlier days, but it is somewhat instructive about what is potentially coming down the path should the LDP lose or have an election and lose the majority.
Well, as I just said, the graph looks very similar, and the whole thing looks very similar to 2009 before Jiminto lost power. The graph that you just showed, I don't want to use the word consensus on Nagatacho, but Jiminto could lose as many as 50, 60 seats, which means in plain English, lose the majority. It would
Right.
stay as the largest party. That is, nobody's questioning that, but it would still lose the majority.
Let's take a look at the voting patterns in Shimane to give us some sort of a sense of how voters might vote if there was an election today. And right now, there is some concern that the prime minister could call for a snap election. Let's talk about that a little bit later. But for right now, let's look at the voting patterns in Shimane and how the Liberal Democratic Party did in the previous two lower house elections and how it did in just this last by-election.
Well, the long and the short, as the figures show, that almost 1/3 of the people who in the past had always voted Jiminto did not vote Jiminto this time. 1/3. And now within that 1/3, there are some who did not even bother to go to the polls, but there are some who went to the polls. And about 40% of those who went to the polls and who for years had voted Jiminto, they voted Riken, 16,225. This is a disaster.
It perhaps indicates that should there be an election, other people will act accordingly. Other LDP members will not vote for the LDP again. They'll hold their nose and they'll vote for an opposition party, or they just won't vote. And in fact, in Shimane, the voter turnout was rather low. It was one of the lowest on record. So if people aren't showing up, it does diminish the number of votes that the LDP gets traditionally. But in this particular situation, not only did they not show up in droves, but there were many turncoats, a third of them. It has been said in some of the press that many people, when they did exit polls, they said that they wanted to show the LDP how disappointed they are. So I'm not going to vote for the LDP, even though I'm an LDP card-carrying member, like you are, Dan. You're a card-carrying LDP member. You vote. Many people didn't vote as a protest vote, and some of them voted, but they voted for the opposition. Mostly they voted for the Constitutional Democratic Party, but not in all cases. Some of them voted for, well, they only had two choices in Shimane. They had the Constitutional Democratic Party candidate, they had the LDP candidate.
About 30% of those who did actually cast a ballot, they cast it against Jiminto. And since there were only two candidates, I mean, it is against. There's absolutely no hesitation.
One might draw from this that the opportunity for the prime minister to call for a snap election is even lower than it used to be. We were talking about the prime minister going to Washington, D.C., getting a slap on the back, having everybody in the joint Congress, laugh at his jokes, and he was going to come back and everybody was going to love the prime minister once again. And then he might call for a snap election and not lose so many seats. The situation now is pretty dire. It doesn't look like the LDP will reach parity. It will definitely lose votes. And there are so many LDP members whose voting percentage, how much more they won over the opposition party, is so razor thin that any kind of disruption or scandal, or it's a rainy day, could turn the apple cart right on its head.
I kind of slightly have a different opinion from you. The situation is bad, but the situation could look that it's going to get worse. For instance, as a result of Shimane, the 6-vote difference, nobody was expected that it would affect the ethics committee and blah, 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 the rest of the story we just talked about. And it may look, I mean, the result of the election to the Shizuoka gubernatorial election later this month do not look very promising at all. Whatever may come up of the ethics committee and so on, it is conceivably that the situation, which is not good, could get even worse. And if the prime minister would feel like the way I just described my feelings, then an election is quite a real possibility.
The theory is that in order to forestall even a worse situation, so for example, the prime minister would wait until September when the LDP chooses once again the president of the LDP. It's possible that it could continue to be Mr. Kishida, but the scenario that you're talking about now is, no, if you wait that much longer, there are so many other things that could go worse. There's nothing good coming down on the horizon. The best thing that the prime minister had was his state visit to Washington, D.C. And now he's come back, and the ethics committee is going to have another meeting, and it's going to be even more turmoil. And a lot can happen between now and September. We've got a couple of important dates that are coming up. The end of the diet is in June, on June 23rd. That's less than 2 months away. And then the election for the governor of Tokyo is on July 7th.
Well, I just want to add water to what you just said. There are several other things that can go wrong, including the Shizuoka election. And what is going to happen in the committees when both parties are going to go log ahead? I think the situation for Demento may be worse than it is today in getting near the end of June.
And that's coming from somebody who wants the LDP to be prominent and to be polished and to be the party of choice, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So these two scenarios that we have on the screen here, one presupposes that there will not be an election called by the prime minister, and the second one presupposes that the prime minister will call for a snap election sooner rather than later if everything else is what you've said makes sense to him. He doesn't want to invite more risk and more uncertainty. Sooner is better. Get it now, even though they're going to lose, what, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 seats, Dan? It's better to do that now, take the Band-Aid off quickly and get a restart than wait for a ultimatum later where the LDP could do even far worse. And just think, 2 months ago, Dan, if we had been talking, if we had perceived this situation today, I mean, we would have both had to have ambulances come pick us up.
Well, maybe we'd have shared one ambulance, you and I. But no, the point is real. Not only is the situation bad, but there are some signs in the wind that it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when Kishida-san came back on Monday, nobody had conceived that the ethics committee was going to meet again. We thought it was done.
That's happened over the last 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, that happened yesterday. And again, I think that there are many indications, feathers in the wind, that tell me that the situation is going to get worse.
When Shinzo Abe was prime minister, he finished being prime minister, he returned to the Abe faction, and he said, this tactic, this kickback that you guys have been practicing the whole time I've been prime minister, I don't think that's a good idea anymore. I'm getting a feeling that it's going to cause us serious trouble, so I want it stopped. I think perhaps the prime minister now is having the same kind of sense of that. I perceive that something good is not going to happen, and we should wrap this up, and we should move briskly towards some sort of a conclusion where we cut our losses and we just go for an election and take the hit so that we can move on. And like you said, it is the LDP is far larger than anybody else. It can afford to lose, 50 seats, 60 seats, Dan? And still be the main player in Japanese politics, but it might have to have a coalition partner beyond Komeito to reach over that 50%.
Well, I have nothing to add to what you just said. I completely agree. The consensus currently on Nagatachio is that Demento is going to lose 50, 60 seats. And 50, 60 seats, whatever it is more than from 259 to 232, which is the borderline, whether it's 60 or 50, it is below the majority. Now, it doesn't mean that the government is going to change. It doesn't mean that the opposition is going to take power, but it means that the political map will change.
The political map is already changing just under our feet right now.
Yeah, it is.
And in the event that there is a snap election, that means that the entire lower house dissolves, and all of the members of the lower house go up for re-election, including the prime minister. After the election is finished, there is no prime minister, right? The whole slate is cleaned, and within 30 days, according to the Japanese constitution, the Diet as a whole must select their prime minister. It's a parliamentary democracy, so individual voters don't vote for the president. He's not a president, he's a prime minister, and so he responds to the Diet at large. So within 30 days of that, we have an election for the new prime minister. It could continue to be Mr. Kishida, but with everything else that's gone on, it could likely be any number of other people, couldn't it?
Well, this is the scenario which you're talking about. Jiminto is still by far the largest party, and whoever the candidate to prime minister is will become prime minister.
Right.
The horrible thing that I'm thinking about is, at the time of that election, could it be possible that somebody else in Jiminto says, I would like to be the candidate of Jiminto to the prime minister selection by House members? It is extremely far-fetched, and I'm the first one to concur with that, but it is not impossible.
He's prime minister today. His poll numbers are very low. GG Press puts it around 16%. So he's done more to diminish the LDP than any prime minister in post-war history. The door is kind of open. The factions don't vote en bloc anymore. The factions, except for the Aso faction, have all been disbanded, whatever that means. But I think a lot of the members could vote with their own convictions in the event of going for who is the best candidate for prime minister. And there's a list of potential candidates that was produced about 5 months ago, and we have it here in front of us, Dan. This was 5 months ago, and this entire complexion has changed drastically, hasn't it?
Well, it has, particularly for one element. If you look at number 5 from the top, the lady in red, who is now a foreign minister, who's just touring the globe to tell Japan, has moved significantly higher. And depending on which polls you believe, she is now below the top guy, Ishiba-san. So the names are the same, but the ranking is a little different. And whether it would be an election of a prime minister by the members of the House, or an election of a party president by the party members in September, it is not absolutely wild to imagine. Well, we said so last time. It's not so wild to imagine that we could have a first lady prime minister.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's very appealing, and I think it injects a little bit of enthusiasm into the political landscape and incites the Japanese people maybe to go to the poll. Yes, we would like to see a Japanese female prime minister, and maybe she'll clean up this mess. The interesting part about this, though, is probably she's number 2. She's probably number 3 within the Kishida faction herself, assuming that the faction exists in any form or shape.
Yes, that's correct.
But you're right to point it out, because as foreign minister, she is in the press all the time. She succeeded as foreign minister, Mr. Kishida, and she has been, I mean, all reports are she's doing such a fabulous job. She's all over the world, like you said, and she has high marks, very few negatives. And I think to me, she is an appealing candidate. But we have Mr. Ishiba, too, who has raised his hand and said, look, I was a candidate once before. I would like to be candidate again. And I think compared to the current prime minister, I didn't take any money. I'm not involved in the kickback scandal. And if you want a clean government, vote for me, LDP.
Well, I can only endorse what you just said.
Yeah. So the last time we went through this political machinations, there were 4 candidates, and then they had a runoff, and then there were 2 candidates, and they had a runoff, and then there was the final candidate who became prime minister. That was Mr. Kishida. He overcame Kono Taro, who potentially could be a candidate too, but rather than it being a a crowded field, it might be a rather limited field, couldn't it? I mean, even the prime minister could decide, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to run to succeed myself. We've closed down the House. Everybody's run for election. We've lost. I will take responsibility for that. I won't run again. It's an open field. That's a likely possibility as well, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, everybody to some extent is a proud person, but for the prime minister to see himself consistently with a support ratio which is below 30%, for his own ego, if not for the sake of a party or the sake of a nation, he might be tempted to resign. Or not to resign. No, I'm sorry. I take the word resign back. Not being a candidate.
Yeah, just not put his hat in the ring.
Yeah, exactly.
And people have asked me, I'm sure you've gotten the question too, what can the prime minister do now to improve his standing and to become more of a likable figure and more of a powerful prime minister that appeals to the general public? That's a difficult one. It's really just not a good time to be Prime Minister Kishida, is it, these days?
Well, the only thing he can do is dissolve the House, clean the deck.
Okay.
I'm not saying he'll do it. I'm answering your question.
Right. So what are the opportunities to dissolve the House? In order for the prime minister to dissolve the House, he has that unilateral authority. He can do that. He can say, I'm going to dissolve the House. There's a certain combination that must exist for him to do that. For one, the Diet must be in session. So by one calculation, he needs to close down the House before the 23rd of June or extend the Diet a couple of days. What opportunities are there for him to close down the House? I mean, reading the tea leaves, what are we looking for that tells us he's moving in that direction?
We have to look at the ethics. What is going to come out of the ethics committee? What is going to make the media leading and then the entire population have a lower numbers of popularity for Mr. Kishida? It's all there. It's a question of numbers. It's
a little bit late if the ethics committee begins their investigations and the press is reporting and it's looking pretty bad for the prime minister. It's almost the cat is out of the bag. Yes, you are. The LDP is looking bad. You guys look like you're just money grubbing people who are trying to stick money in your pocket. You're not paying your taxes, and we are. So we want to kick you out. You're a bunch of bums. That kind of sentiment comes out as a consequence of the ethics committee hearings, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. I'm a diligent, faithful Diminto card-carrying member, but I realize that people who are less committed than I, when they read all the things that have come out with a kickback scandal, they turn out and vote against Diminto. This is exactly what happened in Shimane.
Yes.
Right. And I think between now and the end of the session, things are going to get worse rather than better, which in my book, I repeat the word my book, would increase the chances of Kishida-san cleaning the desk.
Yeah. Before we kind of wrap this session up, and I think it's been really informative. Thank you very much, Dan, for your insight. Should, with Mr. Koizumi, he also had a very tough time when he was in the Diet. He survived it. And many pundits, would advise the prime minister, just stick with it. There's nobody else in contention for you. You are the top dog. And most people would say, there's nobody else. They did that when Mr. Abe was prime minister and when Mr. Suga was prime minister. Well, we would like to have a new prime minister, but nobody else kind of compares to who's in the position right now. So he has that kind of inertia in his favor. He could wait it out until September. Is it a high possibility or even Steven possibility?
The only thing here in the case which you just described, he has to do nothing. There's no need to dissolve anything.
Right.
Just sit on our hands and wait for the end of September election to the party president. That's simple.
It's that simple. And should the president of the Constitutional Democratic Party say, we're going to put together a no confidence motion, the ethics committee has just revealed the most startling information about what they were doing. Let's have a no confidence motion. Let's kick this guy out. even in that situation, it's unlikely that a no confidence motion would survive, right?
No, a motion confidence will not survive. I mean, just look at the numbers. They were on the board a few minutes ago. But in the tradition of, not the Diminto, in the tradition of the Japanese diet, when there is a motion of no confidence being introduced, it might be a motive, an excuse for the prime minister to say, you don't want me? Go to the polls. That is a possibility. And Izumi-san has said already 2 days ago that he may introduce a motion of no confidence, and that would give Kishida-san an additional reason for dissolve. I'm not dissolving because of my party scandal. I'm dissolving because the opposition wants me to dissolve.
So it's interesting. It's a double-edged sword. If the opposition party moves for a no confidence motion, even though it's defeated, they could be punished. Now the prime minister is going to say, well, of course, the no confidence motion didn't survive, and now I'm going to close down the House. It is a bit of a punishment, perhaps, to the opposition parties. But similarly, when the prime minister closes down the lower house, also he goes up for election, and his position as prime minister evaporates for a certain period of time. It's not sure that he's going to be able to succeed himself. It all depends on how the party did in the election.
Yes, that's right. If you dissolve the House, every member of the House, including himself, loses his job, and every member of the House go and stand for election. And after the election, within 40 days, then all the members of the House, irrespective of their party, elect somebody prime minister. That's it.
Right. That's distinctly different from being president of the LDP. When it's the LDP, the members who are diet members, who are members of the LDP, have a vote, and also people like you, card-carrying members, also have a vote for the presidency of the LDP. Those two are completely separate issues.
They are completely separate.
Yeah.
In the election of a prime minister, it is only the members of the House, both houses, that vote. That has nothing to do with party presidential election.
So Dan, in wrapping up this session, 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago, you and I had a session, the title of which was Do or Die. What is the prime minister going to do? Before he goes to Washington, D.C., what choices is he going to choose? And it's going to dictate his outcome when he comes back. And the situation now is completely different. We didn't even anticipate how this would have changed things in Shimane in the by-elections. We've got a whole new ball of wax, and every day seems to bring some new texture, some new angle that is confronting the prime minister. And I really appreciate having you as a colleague to describe and to kind of examine what's going on and what it means and what it potentially means to Japanese politics and to the business world at large here.
Well, I appreciate your kind words. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I'll be here again for many, many more sessions.
Thank you very much.
It is really now in Nagata-cho, it's practically 1 day at a time. 1 day at a time. And the final post is on the 23rd. But that's
the 23rd
of June. End of the session.
So Dan, I expect that you and I will be having another update for our audience within the near term. This pace of change is so rapid. It's probably a good idea to fine-tune your antenna. Join Dan Harada's breakfast. It's once a month. It's at the Capital Tokyo Hotel. Reach out to Dan. And also tune in to our weekly briefings on Sunday mornings to find out what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you. Dan Harada, thank you very much for joining me. Audience, thank you very much for tuning in. If you've got questions or issues, please either direct them to me at Langley Esquire or at Dan Harada at nagatachoforum.com. And let's continue this conversation. Please continue to participate. It's really an exciting time to be in Japan. Dan?
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody.